the state capture inquiry is finally now releasing its findings, with part 1 to be handed over to the president at about 3:30 this afternoon. Let's take you back now to where it all began, with a 2016 report titled State of Capture by the former public protector, Professor Thuli Madonsela. She probed complaints of alleged interference in government affairs by the Gupta brothers, who had tight links with the then former president, Jacob Gedleyihlekisa Zuma. Prof. Madonsela joins me now to reflect on this journey. Prof, good afternoon. Compliments of the new year, and thank you very much for your time. I mean, when you wrote the State of Capture report so many years ago, you called for the setting up of such a commission of inquiry. Finally, it's been a 3-year journey. The first part of the report of their work is being handed over to the president. I mean, it is a significant moment for the country, is it not?
Good afternoon, Dan. Thank you for the privilege, and compliments of the new year to everyone. It is a very significant day in the history of our country, and hopefully opens the possibility of a new chapter in making sure that democracy is not hijacked.
Now, that chapter will only open, some people would argue, if there are consequences out of this Commission of Inquiry's report.
They're right that there has to be consequences, but accountability has multiple dimensions, and key to those dimensions is getting the truth. So we shouldn't undermine the process if the consequences are not immediate. Just knowing the truth gives us an opportunity to fix what has been broken. For example, at the core of this is whether or not the Minister of Finance, Minister Nhlanhla Nene, was wrongfully fired at the instance of the Guptas because he was standing in the way of business interests of companies co-owned by the president's son and the Gupta family, and whether this was part of the systemic capture of the state or portions of the state to repurpose the state to pursue the business interests of these companies that were co-owned by the president's son and the Gupta family.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I'm just thinking, when you were writing that State of Capture report after your investigations, I think, I don't know if you imagine that we'll get to a point that even the head of state would end up giving evidence, as in Cyril Ramaphosa, and that the governing party will come under such scrutiny.
That was inevitable, Dan, that the current president would have to give evidence, given the fact that he had now stepped into the shoes of the head of the African National Congress, and given the fact that the alleged relationship of the Gupta family was with the president of the African National Congress, who was also the president of the country.
Yeah, the Gupta family, I mean, in terms of some of the evidence, without remembering all the details right now, I mean, they were also implicated or mentioned in relation to institutions or state-owned enterprises like your SAAs, your Transnets, and your ESCOMs. And I understand from what we've heard that the first part of this report is going to be really around the transport sector, so to speak. In your head, what should we be expecting? How should we in the public be engaging with this report?
I don't know how the report is structured. I will just tell you, Dan, that the investigation I ordered in my capacity as public protector was squarely dealing with the executive. The transport sector and the SOEs were ancillary. The main question was whether the head of state was not acting in the interest of the public. In other words, was democracy being hijacked in that in the interest of companies co-owned by the president's son and the Gupta family, portions of the state were being hijacked and repurposed to pursue policies and processes that were advancing these companies that were co-owned by his son and the Guptas. So that didn't really necessarily focus on any sector, although the broader investigation was looking at whether this was systemic. In other words, it went beyond just the firing of the Minister of Finance. It also went into the hiring and dismissals of ministers, DGs, and boards of SOEs.
When you were watching and observing the expansion from that focus you've just explained, Prof, and over the last 3 years to the places that the Commission of Inquiry ended up going to, what were you thinking? Were you thinking it was inevitable? Were you thinking it's very good that more is being exposed in defense of our democracy?
No, I really didn't think it was inevitable. I thought it was deliberately done by the then president, who gave the commission terms of reference that made his mandate a kitchen sink approach. You will recall that what I ordered to be investigated is what I had been asked to investigate. It was a very straightforward investigation, starting with the firing of the Minister of Finance, to find out whether or not the Gupta family and the president's son were involved in that process, and whether that was to make way for the companies that were co-owned by his son and the Guptas. And the inquiry also included whether or not he pressured cabinet to get involved in coercing or encouraging the banks to reopen accounts for these companies that were co-owned by his son and the Guptas. So the fact that it was expanded was deliberate and it was wrong. But as I said earlier this morning, we lost a lot, Dan, because of this expansion, which was unlawful in terms of what the court had ordered and the public protector had ordered, but lawful because of the powers of the president to appoint commissions of inquiry are expansive. So in other words, the president changed the nature of this commission using his additional powers to appoint commissions of inquiry. But what we lost then was time, we lost money, we lost evidence, we lost public confidence in the entire process. But what did we gain? We gained what you just said we gained, Dan, is we got a torch that shone into many aspects of the state, and we found that there were lots of corrupt practices. I wouldn't call them state capture, because a state capture is not when you have systemic corruption. A state capture is when you have hijacked the state and you are directing the policies and processes of the state from outside. It's when a shadow government perverts democracy by taking over the processes and policies of the state.
And that's what you found had happened. I'm just thinking, listening to you now, what should then a citizen hope will come out of this expanded terms of reference based of this report, which went further than what it was originally intended to investigate?
Well, I think two things. One is the public should expect that the investigation that was ordered by the public protector and endorsed by a court of law would be concluded. So we get to know whether it is true that the Minister of Finance was not fired to get a job at the development bank, that he was actually fired at the instance of the Guptas or with the involvement of the Guptas, so as to make way for the business interests of the president's son and the Guptas. So we need to know that. We also need to know whether this was part of the systemic capture of the state and repurposing its processes to advance the interests of these companies that were co-owned by the president's son. So that's the first part that should be done, because that's what the public protector ordered, and this was endorsed by a court of law.
Okay.
But the second part that they find is what other corruption is taking place within the state, and how do we clean it up?
Professor Thuli Madonsela, as always, thank you very much for your time and insights and the reflection of where it all began and your sense of what how we should be engaging with it and what we should expect. Professor Thuli Madonsela, reflecting on the state capture inquiry as the first part of the report will be handed over to the President this afternoon. It was her state of capture report way back in 2016 that led to this full commission of inquiry to investigate allegations of corrupt relationship between the then President Jacob Gedleyihlekisa Zuma and the Gupta brothers.